Hi, this is Jason Radford, and today I want to talk to you about how to build your own subject pool. This is the last workshop in our summer series, but fortunately, we have our calendar for the fall. We're going to do one every month, starting off with Mechanical Turk 101. It'll be an introduction to Mechanical Turk, oriented towards those grad students, junior faculty, or even senior faculty who are looking to do their first subject recruitment run on that platform. It'll get you an overview of the basic concepts, the process of releasing a hit, and some best practices for making sure you have good data. After that, we're going to do a conceptual review of multi-person experiments. So if you do multi-person experiments or are interested in doing multi-person experiments, this is going to cover a bit of the different kinds of approaches that you see in economics, psychology, political science, communications, just to get you a very broad sense of the kinds of multi-person experiments out there, the kinds of mechanisms and outcomes people study, and where the potential overlaps and intersections are. So it's going to be a very inspirational review. After that, we're going to talk about doing longitudinal studies, how to get people to not only take a study, but then come back and fill out subsequent waves or versions of that study. Lastly, we're going to then talk about incentivizing online volunteers in December. So thinking about not only how can we pay people, but using non-financial incentives, but also things like gamification. So if you're interested in any of those fall workshops, you can register at volunteerscience.com/events for any one of those. All right, without further ado, let's talk about building your own subject pool. So when building your own subject pool, what I'm talking about is building out this list of people who you can reach out to at any given moment or time to do a study. This can be a couple of hundred people who've signed up for your email list for your research team, or who have committed to taking research studies from your group. It can also be used for doing longitudinal studies. And we'll get into all of that today. So here's the outline. First, I want to talk about what we mean by a pool and what defines a pool, what makes it a bit different from a panel. Next, I want to talk about why build a pool. What's it good for? What's it not good for? And what you should watch out for when you're building your own pool. Then we get into the nuts and bolts of how to do it. There's a couple of steps that you have to do to build up a pool. Next, we're going to talk about engaging your pool, how to get them to come back, get them interested in your research, and participating in good faith. And lastly, I'm going to talk about how to share your pool. How do you go about making it so that other researchers can have access to it, and that when participants from your pool are participating in somebody else's studies, or participating in studies from many different researchers, that there's a consistent experience that's also high quality and follows good IRB practices. So let's start with, what do we mean by a subject pool? I'm going to give an example, actually, not from volunteer science, but from the Harvard Digital Lab for Social Sciences, the D Labs. Very much like volunteer science, they've done a great job of building out this big list of volunteers that are available to other people at the university. A part of this is you can't share contact information across organizations very easily, some privacy restrictions, so the D Labs is restricted to D Labs, but it's a great example of what you can do at your university or in your department. And all they did was, they had a couple of ongoing studies, and every time somebody did one of their studies, they asked them to sign up for future studies. And for the course of 2 or 3 years of doing this, they had a pretty sizable list. They also invested in that list by every month giving away a Amazon gift card, I think, for $50 for any new subscribers. So anybody else who signed up went into this lottery for $50. And using that, they built up this large list. And the link here is to a journal article where they validated that doing basic social and behavioral research with this online pool of volunteers provides valid data on a range of studies. Very much like what we did with volunteer science. So the idea here, I think, is that you can do this at any department, at any college, for any organization, whether you're Coca-Cola or Johns Hopkins. You can do high-quality social and behavioral research using a pool of online volunteers. So, to the nitty-gritty, what is a subject pool? Very simple. It's just a list of people who've opted in to receiving recruitment requests from you. That's it. It's very much just a mailing list or a contact list of people who said it's okay for you to send them solicitations to participate in research. Sort of the subject pool plus not only has the list of people with contact information, but also demographic data so that you can target people for future recruitment. So you know if you need to recruit people who are women under the age of 25, you have their gender and you have their age, and you can see who in your pool fits that, and then only send a recruitment message to those people. So your pool generally are people you can tap into at any time. They've given you their email address, they've given you their phone number. This is not a Facebook group. This is not your Twitter followers. A part of this is when you post something to Facebook or when you post something to Twitter, you have no idea who's going to see it. And even in your Facebook group, you may have 10,000 people in your Facebook group, but Facebook will only show your post to maybe 50 of those people at any given post. So this is a dedicated pool who's opted in to receiving recruitment messages and have, at least in some capacity, demonstrated that they will participate. There are also people who participate in good faith. So people that have completed previous studies, who've provided you with good data. They didn't rush through or provide you with junk or answer randomly, which is something that you see commonly with online workers and sometimes with students in classes who don't want to participate but are forced to for extra credit. So these are people that will participate in good faith. And if they don't participate in good faith, you can kick them out of the pool. After that, these are people who also want to help you. They signed up, they opted in because at some point they thought it was a good idea to further your research or advance your research. So they're there to help. As a part of this, they're also much more willing to let you know when there are issues. So if there's something that's not clear or something breaks, they'll reach out and they'll let you know that things aren't working. Next, the people who fit your sampling requirements. So this is really important for people who study hard to reach or very narrow populations. So one of the studies that I'm working on right now involves couples, and it's very couples who just moved in together. And it's very difficult to find couples 6 months after they moved in together. There are a lot of them, but it's hard to find the 1, 2, or 3 places to go to where we can find those couples. And so for us, what we want to do is we want to build a pool of those people, and after 6 months or a year of recruiting those people, we'll hopefully have a large list of couples who have just moved in together or who are just beginning their cohabiting relationship with one another. And we'll be able to go back to them over the next 2, 3, or 4 years and study these early couples. Lastly, these are also people who you have background data on and you can then select from. So again, their gender, age, race, ethnicity, if you, of course, collect the data. And then you can email only the people who fit your sampling frame. So even if you're doing something that's very broad, anybody over the age of 55 can participate in this. It's nice to know how many people over the age of 55 you have in your pool. So if you need to go out and recruit other people besides your pool. But also you don't send a bunch of solicitations to people who don't qualify. So how is this different from a panel? So a pool, again, is relatively unorganized. It's just a big list of people. A panel is another big group of people, but you are trying to recruit the same people over and over again for a single study, or at least a set of related studies. Whereas a pool is just any research question can be pushed out to the pool. So why should you build a subject pool? One of the biggest difficulties in performing research with human beings, whether it's online or offline, is recruiting subjects. There's a reason why psychology and experimental economics are having difficulty in replicating online experiments. Not only because it's easy to try to replicate these experiments, it's more difficult to replicate qualitative research, for example, so you can sort of do it. But because Many of these studies are based on low numbers of participants, so you're much more likely to get false positives and false negatives, so the false positives are the ones that get published. For you as a researcher, recruiting subjects is also consuming of your research funds, your time, and your effort. So you can spend money paying subjects, and you can spend money paying RAs to recruit subjects and clean data. And if you pay your RAs, $5,000 for a semester or whatever, to recruit subjects, if they can't recruit subjects, it's too hard. That $5,000 is not giving you the subjects that you need for your study. So you can lose money. If you don't have money, or even if you do, you're still going to lose your time if it's difficult for you to recruit subjects. So it takes time to find the right subjects. I mentioned earlier talking about recruiting couples who just moved in together. That's taking up a lot of our time to try to find those people. And if we had a pool, all of that time could be saved. Similarly, relatedly, you spend a lot of time creating recruitment materials, thinking about how to find the right subjects, what kind of messages are going to persuade them to participate. You may be spending time posting stuff on Twitter or Facebook to recruit online subjects. Again, you're spending all of this time in recruiting, and if people don't respond, it's time wasted or time lost. And finally, you spend all this money and time recruiting subjects, and if you don't, even when you do get people, you can end up with bad data. So people who are rushing through because you tapped into the wrong people or they're bots or something. You can also end up with a broken study and lose your subject recruitment effort. So all of the work that you go into recruiting those subjects ends up for naught because there was a bug in your code. So by making subject recruitment easier, you reduce the risk of losing money, losing time, wasting your effort. So this is a study published by, I forgot his first name, Kemmerer in 2018 with a bunch of other co-authors, which is why it's an et al. Reviewing the behavioral studies published in Nature and Science between 2010 and 2015. And they found that less than 14% of them, I believe it was 3 in total, had 100 subjects or more in their experiments. And of those, of all of the behavioral studies, only 67% replicated. Now, many of them were not too far underpowered, but the number of subjects was related to replicability. So the more subjects you had, the more likely it was that it would be replicated. But what this does is it points to the relationship between the number of subjects and the quality of your science. The more subjects you're able to get, the less likely you are to get a false positive or a false negative. Of course, this is related to the power needed to detect the effect size. But generally, we know most social scientists are recruiting too few subjects because it's difficult. So this is why you should be building out your pool. Bigger studies, more precise estimates of your effects. Now, there are a couple of issues with building your subject pool that you want to be aware of. The first is data quality. So one of the issues that arises is people no longer are naive to your types of studies. So they've participated in one study before, and they are used to taking personality tests, or they're used to taking solving certain kinds of problems, or participating in economic bargaining experiments, and so they are no longer naive, and this can be an issue. One of the ways that you can address this is keeping track of who in your pool has participated in what studies, so you can offer new studies to people who haven't participated in a economics experiment, or somebody who's never taken a personality test from your sample. There are demand effects. So a demand effect is when a subject behaves in a certain way because of what they think the researcher expects of them. So if you're doing a study on racial bias in hiring, and people know that you study racial bias in hiring, people are either going to respond by trying to imagine or think through what that bias may be, and give you less biased or more biased responses because they think that's what you want to find, or they don't want to seem racist. So these demand effects can affect your pool or become more clear in your pool. Selection effects are when particular kinds of people sign up for studies. So every study has selection effects. Even your probability-based sampling has selection effects of who's more likely to pick up the phone. But in a pool, you'll also have your own specific selection effects. Certain kinds of people will want to sign up for your studies. And so you have to just be aware of what those selection effects may be, and either doing recruitment to get out of those selection effects or being able to control for those selection effects or review those selection effects when you do a particular study. There are also some added risks to your subjects, your participants, when you have a pool. First, the studies are no longer anonymous because you have contact information about these people. So these are personally identifying pieces of information about the people. So you're no longer able to do an anonymous study. That's okay. Confidentiality is second best. It's not as good as anonymity. But confidentiality requires that you keep a very strong separation between what's considered the pool data. So the contact information, any empanelment data, has to be separated from the actual participation data, the data somebody generates within a study. Now, you can bring in pool data, and you can say, can I reuse your gender and your race? But you have to have that specifically consented to by the participant. So you have to be aware of the confidentiality issues when you're creating a pool. And lastly, you're keeping data around for longer. So most studies, you collect data and then it gets thrown away in a couple of years after the studies are over. When you're building a panel, you're collecting data on participants over a long period of time, and you're not necessarily throwing it away. So it's just more data lying around. If somebody happens to hack your system or leak your data, you'll have more of it there. On the legal side, because you're collecting data on people over the long haul, you have to be able to facilitate data deletion and opt-out. These are legal requirements from GDPR and CIPRA, the California and European laws, regarding people's right to have their data deleted. And of course, opt out of communications. And so if you're building a pool, you have to allow people to opt out or delete their data. So the negative parts aside, why create a pool? Because I think you can get more studies done more quickly with more participants and less effort. So you're able to do more science, better science, more quickly and efficiently and effectively. And the last thing I want to mention here is that you should always be building your pool. And what I mean by that is building pools takes time. And there's a saying, I think, in finance, I've heard it in finance. The best time to to plant a tree is 30 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. And that's the way that it works with the pool. Is that if you, the best time to start build your pool is 10 years ago, right? You'd have a huge pool right now if you started 10 years ago. But the second best time to build your pool is now, and let that email list or contact list of participants, of people who want to participate in your research, start building. And every study that you do, ask people to join your pool. So every time you do a study, every time you advertise an event for your lab or your event for your research or a presentation at your conference, you can invite people to sign up for your pool to participate in your studies. All right, now let's get into the nuts and bolts of how you build your subject pool. We have 6 basic steps that we'll go through here, from introducing yourself to the first study or the study that people are originally being recruited for, asking people to sign up, saying thank you when they do, empaneling them, collecting that data to know who they are and be able to send them only the most relevant recruitment requests, and then disenrollment, allowing them to get out. So I'm going to use volunteer science because we built our system to hit these 6 steps and provide some great examples of how to do this. So when introducing yourself, you want to use strong visuals if you can. We use Pixabay to get free images for experiments, and in this case, the lab that we're putting up here has their own logo. So having a nice lab logo or a photo of The members of your lab can be a nice and engaging way to introduce yourself to participants. You also want to give your participants a compelling overview of your research and who you are. When people sign up for these contact lists, they want to know who's going to be controlling their data. And it's the beginning of a relationship. They want to know who's going to be writing them emails, who's going to be inviting them to things in the future, and what are the things they're going to be asked to do in the future. And by introducing yourself, the kind of research that you do, and the impact that your research has will help them make that decision and understand the kind of person that they're building a relationship with. The last thing that I think that you should have for your introduction is some basic introductory studies. Now, you'll have one study. You've got to start somewhere, so everybody starts with one study. But if you have some ongoing studies that require a lot of people, or just can collect data over a year or 2 years, giving people a couple of things to participate in allows them to, one, help them get more interested in your research, but it gives them something to do to start off with. And so maybe somebody signs up for the lab initially. You can send them an immediate thank you that says, thank you for signing up. Here's another study that you can do if you like the study that you participated in. So having a couple of things for people to do when they first meet you and sign up will be helpful for engaging them over the long term, establishing that relationship. At the bottom here we have one big takeaway, which is talk about your subject areas, not your problems. And a part of this is telling people who you are without creating demand effects. So you want to talk about, I study, say you're somebody who studies discrimination in hiring. Rather than studying discrimination per se as a problem, the subject area can be, social identity and employment, or the hiring process from multiple perspectives, or inequalities in the hiring process. The more about this as a subject area you make, the less clear it is what you're expecting out of your studies and your participants. For any given study, especially the first study or the study that people are being brought to in your process, again, you want to use strong visuals if you have the ability to do that. Again, I encourage you to do that. But you also want to explain the study itself, answering a couple of questions. And this is the sort of template that we have for volunteer science. The first thing is, what's the study about? What are you going to ask people to do? How long is it going to be? What's the actual ask for this first study that they're going to do? This gives people a realistic expectation of the commitment, the experience that they're about to have, and what you want them to do. After that, you want to talk to them about the problem being solved. And this is more of a social, sorry, not a social problem. This is more of the scientific question. Is there inequality in hiring? Does social identity impact who gets hired? Again, if you're focused more on scientific questions than problem per se, you can reduce the demand effect. After that, we want to talk about the impact that research has on people's actual lives. Again, you want to stay away from problem statements to reduce demand effects, but you still want to talk about this will reduce inequality in employment, or this will help create a fair employment training system. But you can talk more speculatively about how a person's participation in the research will help actually change the way the world works. Again, this is mostly because we're looking at online pools of volunteers. So they need motivation to participate in a study, and they need to understand the value that you put on their time. And lastly, you want to tell them who's eligible. Can they participate? You don't want somebody to start a study, get 20 minutes in, and then turns out they don't qualify. So you want to be clear on who's eligible. The basic takeaway for the study that you use to impanel people in any study is that you want to give them a good experience. You want everything to work. You want it to be respectful. You want it to be high quality. so that they know that that's the kind of research that you do. You also want to demonstrate your scientific seriousness, that you are you're going to use their data to solve the big problems in your field, and that you're asking well posed questions, or clear, or you're creating clear data collection and interface interactivity, or interactive systems, so that people know that the data they're generating is going to be used for high quality science. The next piece is the ask. When you ask people for their contact information, there's a couple things that you need to tell them. So this is actually a panel example, but you can generally reuse this. First, you want to tell them what the commitment is. How often are you going to send them notifications? It could be once every month, or it could just be whenever we have a new study, we'll email you. But the thing is you have to be consistent. So if you say I'm only going to send you an email every time we have a new study, don't send them a weekly email with the latest news from your lab. If you want to send the latest news from your lab, just add that here. All you will need to do is just be consistent. Tell them what you're going to be doing with their contact information, and then actually do it. And if you change, let them know. Just again, communication, transparency are what you really need to do when communicating with your panel. Next, you want to have some kind of data use statement. So we'll only use your data for this study, or for this lab, or for this department. We're not going to sell your information. We're not going to give your information to anybody. It's just going to be used by us for this. So you want to make sure you say that clearly. And lastly, you want to have a confidentiality statement. Let them know that you're not going to link contact information and study data, so that they understand that that what they say in the study is not going to be linked back to any personally identifiable information. And then, of course, you want to have the contact information form. In this case, you only want to collect the data you're going to use. Don't collect more personally identifiable information than you need, because the more you have, the more likely it is to become a privacy violation. If you have somebody's name and you have their email address, they can change their email. It's not easy to do, but they can do it. But they don't have to change their phone number, and vice versa. One question you'll have to ask yourself about the ask is whether you want to do it before the study or after the study, and if you want to require sign up, or if you want to make the sign up optional. And I'll get to some of those trade-offs a little bit later. On the thank you side, you'll want to figure out how to say thank you, and you want to say it every time somebody does a study or does something that that benefits you, basically. So certainly after the study, after they sign up for your email list, you want to be able to say thank you. And in some ways, you want to communicate the impact of their participation. Here in Volunteer Science, we have this Timmy the Triad saying thank you. And we have a way of quantifying how much money people have saved for science by volunteering, based on how much the study would have paid participants in a class, for example, or participants in a student lab. Next, the empanelment. So this is collecting the data that you'll need to send the right people the right requests. So usually this is a survey, and when somebody fills out the survey, you send some cleaned version of the data over to your contact system. And we do this in our subject management system automatically. So you put together the survey in Volunteer Science, and you just send over the responses. So when you're doing your empanelment, you'll create these attributes, as we call them, in your subject management system. That's next to Jane Doe or John Doe, and jdoe@mail.com. We know this is a female who was born in 1972, who answered Asian, answered widowed, answered Catholic, lives in Oregon, who makes $50,000 to $75,000 a year. Again, you can then use these to target your recruitment emails to only females or only people who make $50,000 to $75,000. When you're putting together your empanelment survey or your empanelment process, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a survey, you need to answer two questions. So what do you need to know usually to build a sample? Do you usually recruit based on gender? Do you usually recruit based on religion? If you don't, you probably shouldn't collect that information. The second thing you want to do, or second question you want to answer about your research is, what data do you usually collect in your studies? Because you can reuse it with people's permission. So if you're always asking people for their gender, you might as well collect it in the empanelment and then ask to reuse it in the particular study. If you're always researching people based on their religious identity, you're a religious sociologist or you're a psychologist of religion, you can have you'll want to collect religion in your empanelment survey. Lastly, disenrollment. I sort of covered a lot of this earlier, but there are two aspects of this. There's an opt-out, so people can say, I don't want any more communications. Don't reach out to me, send me recruitment emails anymore. And then there's a data deletion aspect or option. And this should involve deleting not only the contact information, the information in the subject management side of the house, but also subject or study data. So if they filled out surveys, they've done a group experiment, you have to be able to delete that data. If you're doing this in volunteer science, the opt-out you can do by yourself, but the data deletion, you'll need our help. So just reach out and we can help facilitate. But again, this is not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's literally a legal requirement that you offer it. Okay, so we give you a lot of steps for building your panel. There are two basic models here. The panel model, where you empanel people up front, and the volunteer model where you ask it at the end or make it optional. And you can switch these around. So you can put the ask up front and make it optional, or you can put the ask at the end and make it required. And people are required to sign up for your panel if they want, their personality score, for example. So let me just walk through this for a second. So in both cases, you'll start with the introduction, who you are. In the panel model, you'll then go straight to the ask, and you'll ask, hey, do you want to sign up for this panel? We'll contact you for future studies, or we need your contact information for follow-up studies. After that, you then do the empanelment. So you do the ask, you collect that basic data on people. This is why it's the panel model. So you don't want to collect data on people who aren't going to join the panel, and you don't want to collect data in a particular study without getting the basic empanelment data that you'll need for all of your waves. That's why I call it the panel model. So you do the ask. People can't continue until they assent to future outreach or future contacts. You do the empanelment, and then you do the study for that first wave or whatever the current wave is. And thank you, and then on the back end is your disenrollment. The volunteer model, the study comes first. After the introduction, they do the study, you say thank you, and then on the thank you, you say, hey, if you like this study, if you want to be a participant in future studies, or you want to do more, participate in more research on, early stage couples, sign up for our pool, and we'll send you notifications about when our research is published, future studies that you can participate in, and when they say yes, if they say yes, you can send them to the empanelment survey. And then they go into your subject management system or the subject system, and where they can disenroll if they decide to leave later on. So just sort of pulling out the highlights from all these steps in this introduction, tell people who you are and what you care about. The people are building a relationship and they want to know who they're building a relationship with. The study should be putting your best foot forward here. This is like a first date. Good conversation, well-dressed, something nice that people know that you're somebody who's fun to hang out with and dating seriously, right? So this is the study is like the first date. The ask, this is a very technical section where you tell people what you're going to do with their data, how frequently you're going to contact them for what, how you'll use their data, if you'll share their data, who's going to have access to it. See, in some ways it's sort of a legal document, but not. You're covering your legal basis, but it's not a legal document. On the empanelment step, just collect the data you need to do your work, whether it's the data you need to sample people or the data you need to collect for all of your studies. There's often a big overlap there, but not always. Thank you. Always show your appreciation. There's no such thing as saying thank you too many times, usually. But the idea is that when you're building any study, any communications, always show your appreciation. And lastly, disenrollment, let people leave, especially let people delete their data. A couple of software recommendations for how to do this. Most universities have access to Qualtrics, so I put that first. Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, these survey systems have ways for people to sign up or for you to collect email addresses and send emails to your pool, though they don't have any support for non-survey research. So these are really good for surveys in particular, but not much else. Asona Systems is a pool manager system that's really built for your undergrad psych lab. So it's really good for having students sign up, and when they finish, they get course credit, or at least you get this big spreadsheet of faculty member, student, and number of course or number of credits that the student has earned. So it's really great for managing student pools. MailChimp. So if you have no funding, you don't have Qualtrics, or you want to use your own mail system, you're not really using a subject pool or a student subject pool, MailChimp is the easiest way to get started because it's free. If you have less than 2,000 people, you can send really great emails. You can really manage your subject data pretty well. The problem with MailChimp is that it's not linked to study data, so it's you have to do all of the integration on the back end. So when somebody fills out a study and fills out their empanelment study, and you need to put it up in MailChimp, you've got to do that yourself. So you have to do that, a lot of data management, data curation yourself. But once it's in MailChimp, you can send a lot of emails, a lot of really great emails. And lastly, volunteer science, of course. So we built a fully functioned pool management system that supports email, SMS, and push notification. So you can upload a contact list or empanel people in a study. That data is going to go into the subject management system along with any empanelment data that you want to create, and you can customize your empanelment data to be whatever you want it to be. And then you can send out emails or SMS to people who've given you their email or their phone number, and you can schedule it, you can automate it. It's a pretty full-featured system. Okay, so now you have a pool, you're building a pool, 2 sets of best practices. And the first one is about engaging your pool. How do you keep people interested in your research so that when you have a study, they'll come back and participate? So in general, you want to think of your pool or your contact, the way that you engage with your pool, as building a relationship, getting to know them getting to know you, talking about your research, talking about your interests, talking about the scientific problem that you study. The minimum number of communications, I would say, is once per quarter. You're not a marketing blog, you're not a newspaper, you don't necessarily have a ton of communications. And I don't think people expect to hear something from you every week or something from you every month. I think once per quarter, to let them know that you're still here, that you're still interested in them participating, and that you're still doing science is fine. On the maximum side, I don't think there really is a maximum per se, as long as it's relevant. And I say that there's no maximum because there are companies like Qualtrics and Gallup who maintain these lists. Let me think of the more marketing ones, like Nielsen. Nielsen cites the people who are there to participate in marketing studies. And they work with tons of companies with tons of marketing studies, and they pump out a couple of studies a day. And so I think that there's no such thing as a maximum here, but you have to make sure that you're keeping it relevant and that people understand that if you are going to be sending an email or 2 every day, that that's the frequency that you're going to be sending it out, and that it makes sense that you're sending that many a day. Types of engagement. So if you're thinking about, okay, I've got this pool, what do I tell them? Obviously, the first thing is when you have a new study. Each new study, I think you can do a new announcement plus one or two reminders before people get tired of it. Um, if you're able to filter out both people who haven't participated, you can do more reminders. So you can do this with volunteer science. When somebody participates, you can put a new attribute or flag in the subject management system so that you don't send future messages to those who've participated. And that'll allow you to get more than just two reminders out if you can just focus on the non-participants. Another one that's really great is study results or a new publication, especially when you are publishing a study that people participated in the past. Um, One of the things that's really difficult with science is that it takes forever to get studies published, especially in the social sciences. And so generally it's difficult to publish a study based on lab research and have those people still around when the study is actually in press. Um, and so I think it's okay to highlight publications that don't involve people in the pool necessarily, but involve some of the researchers, because it's usually in the same topic area. Next, lab events. So this is one of the things where I think you can create events for your pool. So you can give them a lecture on your research. You can do a Q&A, sort of a live stream, Facebook using Facebook Live or Twitch or YouTube to stream a conversation and take questions and answer them. You could also do a Zoom discussion. So just set up a channel for people to come in and ask you, like sort of like office hours, ask you questions about your research. But what this does is, again, helps build relationships, lets people chat with you one-on-one, and again, it sort of gives back something to your pool. Lastly, I think is the most traditional sort of blog-style article. This may be, in some ways, the easiest thing to do. You can write 500 to 1,000 words on an article that you read or a topic that you're interested in. As you're sort of working out your thoughts, you can write it a blog and send it to your pool and engage them in the kinds of things that you're thinking about. Again, people are signing up because they're interested in the science that you do, and so sending them a blog-style article about the science that you're thinking about, it's totally within the world of expectation for these participants. All right, last leg here. How do you share your pool? I think this is the most powerful thing that you can do. Once you have a pool, you can have other participants, other researchers, send their recruitment messages through your pool, and as they are recruiting novel participants, can send those novel participants to your pool and help build out this one huge, big shared pool. This is what we did with volunteer science. This is what happened with Harvard's D-Labs. Is by sharing the pool, you really can invest in growing the number of people there and diversifying the pool. So, to go into what I was just talking about, the first piece of sharing it is you get to share the recruitment load. So as a new study comes out, a new researcher taps into your pool, you can ask them to send anybody who participates in their study that recruitment ask. Since you participated in Dr. So-and-so's study, would you be interested in signing up for their department's pool? Or the pool for the lab that they work with, or the lab that they're partnering with. It also allows you to diversify your studies, which can reduce demand effects. So people are signing up for different things. They expect researchers to have different questions. The more diverse the kinds of studies, the less likely people are to guess what the researcher is interested in, and to be less savvy about the different kinds of studies that are available. Again, going back to the issue of naivete. It also diversifies participants. So I said earlier, we want couples who are just moving in together, which means it's a very narrow age range and a very specific part of life, usually. And so if we work with some folks who are interested in older couples and how couples address and later life issues, that can help us diversify our pool in terms of age, even though we're still all studying couples. It also increases engagement. So again, you're sending more messages. The study recruitment messages really do get a lot of bounce in these pools because that's what people are there for. And so the more studies you can ask them to participate in, the more likely they are to see your email, to open it up, to participate in your studies. And lastly, you're sort of sharing the costs of subject recruitment with other people. So, if you spent $100 recruiting 100 people, whether in time or money, if you do one study, that's $100 for one study, or $1 a participant. If you have a second researcher then go back behind you and recruit those same 100 people for a second study, now it's suddenly 50 cents per participant recruited in time, effort equivalent. So you're making more use of your pool. Now, how would you actually then share your pool? And it sounds like it is a great idea to share your pool. But how do you do it in a way that respects participants and protects your reputation and their experience? So the first thing I would recommend is establishing standards. Rules around deception, will you allow deception or not? Subject payments, will you allow subject payments or not? And usability rules. Must studies be mobile friendly? I recommend that they all are. Can you punish people? Is a common usability rule. But you want to have some standard. You also want to make sure that all studies work as a part of usability. No broken studies is a good standard to have. Studies break all the time, and you want to make sure that that's a part of the standard expectation. And you want to make sure that you can enforce that, which means that you have to have somebody go in every study and make sure that if you don't allow a deception, there's no deception. That the study actually works, that it's usable. You want to have a clear recruitment procedure. So what happens when a researcher comes to you with a study? You want to be able to put together a clear set of content. So what's the title of the study? What's the study description? What are we going to send in the email? Who's going to be sending the email? How long does it take to send that email? All that stuff should be proceduralized. Or at least have a clear sense of what's going to happen. You want to make sure that you distinguish sender and researcher. So, if this is coming from, for us, if it's coming from volunteer sciences, if this is a volunteer science study, we'll say researchers at volunteer science. If it's not a volunteer science study, we'll say researchers at the University of whatever are interested in participating in this, da 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 da. But the subject line will say it's coming from volunteer science. And so volunteer science is sending that study request on behalf of a researcher. And lastly, you'll definitely want to develop a theme or a brand or a voice, something that's going to make it so that every email you send, and no matter what study you're recruiting for, you're recognizable as a lab or as the person running the pool. So again, the D-Labs thing is nice because there's a name to it. I'm assuming they have a template that they use, and so every email that goes out, people know that it's coming from D-Labs. It's not coming from some random person. The same thing with volunteer science. Here's a procedural recommendation for how that works. You have researchers who are eligible to send requests to your pool, and somebody in the middle, you, a lab manager, a communications manager, is going to sit in between them. And the researcher goes to you, or the lab manager, or the communication manager, and says, "Here's my study." The manager, you, then says, "Well, here's the form you need to fill out to make sure we have the title and the study description and everything that we need to do it." Then you, the lab manager, test their study, make sure it works. And then when all of the check boxes have been checked and all of the material has been collected, then you send it out to your pool in a nicely formatted, brand-aligned, tone-aligned email, so that people know it's coming from you, even though it's somebody else's research. All right, that's it. Again, I wanted to remind you about our fall workshops, Mechanical Turk 101, for people who are looking to first run their Mechanical Turk hits, a review of multi-person experiments across disciplines, a how-to on doing longitudinal studies, and then incentivizing online volunteers. If you need any help, please contact me at jason_radford@volunteerscience.com, and you can register for all of these workshops at volunteerscience.com/events. You'll also be able to see on the /events website all of our previous workshops, which are all here on YouTube as well. All right, thank you so much, and we will see you in the fall.